Okay, I'm going to get started here in just a minute. Today, we are going to be talking about the juvenile justice system and how the juvenile justice system differs from the adult justice system. Let me give me just a second here. I'm going to turn off the recording for just a second while I get a few things set up, so just bear with me for a minute.
All
Uh,
right, thank you.
okay. You're the only one that seems to attend these on a regular basis, but let me go here.
I like asking questions, so I want to make sure that if I have any, that I've got the opportunity to.
Well, good, good. Well, and I enjoy you asking questions. I would much rather engage in a discussion than simply me talking forever about something. Now, um, so let me bring up my whiteboard for just a second. And I'm going to use it to share a few things with you. Today's or not today, but next week's case study is Ethan Couch. And Ethan Couch's study is very controversial in the sense that he committed a very serious criminal activity. In fact, his behavior resulted in the deaths of, I think, at least 3 people died as a result of his criminal negligence. And the question that is being asked that you need to address is, should he be tried as an adult? And before we get to that question, there's a couple of things that I want to outline first so we can get to that question. You can understand why that question is even being asked. At the time of his offense, Ethan Couch was 16 years old. Now, let me talk about the juvenile justice system here for a minute. In the United States, beginning in the early 1900s, we made a distinction, and the distinction continues to exist, although it's been modified significantly since the early 1900s. But we make a distinction between the adult criminal system and the juvenile criminal system, or the adult justice and the juvenile justice system. The idea goes back to the whole issue of mens rea. Remember that in forensic psychology, this issue of mens rea comes up over and over and over again in terms of an individual's mental status at the time that they committed a crime. Or not, I shouldn't say the time they committed a crime. At the time they committed an act, because the mental status determines significantly whether an act is a crime or whether an act is not a crime. Let us take something as banal as shoplifting. You go into a store and you you go into the store to buy some things. You take something off the shelf and put it in your pocket. Are you now guilty of shoplifting? The answer is, at that particular point in time, no. Just because you take something off the shelf and put it in your pocket does not make you guilty of shoplifting. Why? Because your intent. Do you intend to leave the store with it without paying, in which case then that is shoplifting? Or did you put it in your pocket simply because your hands are full of other things and you don't have any other place to put it? You see what I'm talking about here? So the simple act of putting an item in your pocket does not make that act a crime. It does not make it shoplifting. If you then go to the cashier, pull it out of your pocket, pay for it, walk off, no crime has been committed. Even if you leave it in your pocket and you are apprehended, you say, oh, wait a second. If you can convince them that your intent was to pay for it, but your hands were full of other things, and so you had to put it in your pocket and you forgot that it was in your pocket, have you committed a crime? Technically, no. Technically, no, because of this mens rea. Now, this mens rea comes into play when we talk about the distinction between the juvenile and the adult justice system. As I've said before, there are 3 reasons that will get why you do not commit, why an act would not commit a crime. One is, insanity. That is, you are insane and incapable of forming intent because of insanity. The whole insanity defense revolves around that. The second issue, as I mentioned, is idiocy. Your intellectual functioning. You have an intellectual deficit disorder. You've got an intellectual deficiency disorder. You've got an IQ that is really, really low. Your intelligence is such that you cannot form intent. And then the third one is infancy. These are the three reasons why you would be excluded from being able to form intent, being able to form mens rea. So if you have insanity, if you have idiocy, or if you have infancy, you cannot form intent. And this is something I have said multiple times in this class. So we're going to ignore the insanity. We've talked about that. We're going to ignore the idiocy. We may get back to that if we have time. We're going to look at the infancy issue. Clearly, we would agree that a 1-year-old child cannot commit a crime. The 1-year-old child may do some bad things, making a mess in their diaper, throwing their poop around the room, that type of thing. And 1-year-olds sometimes do those type of things. But can a 1-year-old commit a crime? And almost everybody in the class, I don't think there's anybody in the forensic psychology class who would say, yes, a 1-year-old can commit a crime. 1-year-olds can't commit crimes. 2-year-olds can't commit crimes. 3-year-olds can't commit crimes. So the question becomes, where do we draw the line between infancy and competency? And when I'm talking about competency in this, I'm not talking about competency to stand trial. I'm not talking about competency to testify. I'm talking about competency to commit a crime. So where do we draw that line between infancy, where an individual cannot commit a crime? A 1-year-old can't commit a crime. 3-year-old can't commit a crime. 4-year-old, no. 5-year-old, no. 6-year-old, no. But as I go up, can an 18-year-old commit a crime? Yes, unless idiocy or insanity come into play, an 18-year-old can commit a crime. Okay, can a 17-year-old, can a 16-year-old? See, where we draw the line is a matter of an arbitrary distinction. In ages past, the line was drawn really, really low, so that you had children as young as 9 and 10 going to big person jail in the 1800s. And I'm serious. And you had 9, 10, 11-year-olds actually going to prison with adults. Now, the modern mentality is, oh my God, that's horrible. And I agree, that is horrible. And so the whole juvenile justice issue arises out of that question of, when does somebody become an adult for the purpose of competency to commit a crime? I don't have the answer. Different jurisdictions define it slightly differently. In general, individuals under the age of 7 years are incapable of committing a crime. That is, by law, by definition, they cannot form intent. They cannot be competent to commit a crime. Individuals over the age of, in North Carolina, it is drawn as 16 years. Over the age of 16 years and older, you are competent. You are capable of committing a crime, of forming intent, of having the mens rea necessary to be prosecuted and serve the full penalty of your crime. So what happens between 7 years and 16 years of age? What happens between 7 years and 16 years of age is this juvenile justice, where you are somewhat capable of forming intent. You are somewhat capable of committing a crime. And this is the whole issue of juvenile justice. In the adult system, and we've talked in this class before about rehabilitation, about individuals being able to, they go to jail to be rehabilitated. No, adult jail is not about rehabilitation. Adult jail is about retribution and punishment. Adult jail is about quarantine. This is what adult jail is about. Adult prison is about retribution. The individual needs to pay for their crime. And you hear people say this all the time. They really need to pay for the criminal action that they have done. It is about punishment. We need to punish these lawbreakers. We need to punish these sex offenders. We need to punish these people who have done these really bad things. We need to make them pay. We need to punish them. We need to make them pay. We need to make them suffer, and quarantine. We need to get them off the streets so that they're not committing any new crimes. This is the adult system. The juvenile justice system, on the other hand, the juvenile system is about rehabilitation. It is about education. It is about restoration. The idea being that juveniles are not fully responsible for what they do, and therefore we need to treat them differently from adults. Now, you can disagree with that, and we can debate that. In fact, there's a huge debate going on in North Carolina right now. It's been going on for a number of years. It's kind of died down recently because of money, and I can explain that money issue here in just a minute. But there is this really big, huge debate in North Carolina about, should we raise the juvenile justice age from 16 to 18? North Carolina is one of only 3 or 4 states that sets the bar at 16. All the other states set the bar at 18. That is, you are part of the juvenile justice system until you are 18 years of age. And the reason North Carolina hasn't raised it to 18 so far is partly because of money. The juvenile justice system doesn't have the resources to be able to handle all of the 16, 17-year-olds that would then come into the juvenile justice system. I've heard a number of juvenile court counselors who say, we don't have the resources to deal with the kids we currently have. We can't handle the thousands of kids that would then come into juvenile justice if the age were raised to 18. So part of it is money. Part of it is resources. Part of it is also philosophy. North Carolina's philosophy and the philosophy of the North Carolina culture is that at the age of 16, you're pretty well capable of taking care of yourself. You don't have to continue going to school after the age of 16. 16, 17-year-olds are not required to finish high school. At 16 years old, you can get a job, and you can get a full-time 40-hour-a-week job working in a factory here in North Carolina. Now, there are still certain things that 16 and 17-year-olds can't do, but for the most part in North Carolina, 16 and 17-year-olds are considered to be adults for many, many different purposes. And as I said, there are lots of things that they still can't do. But legally and in terms of criminal justice, they're adults. They're adults. So looking at the juvenile justice system here, as I said, the debate is, where do we draw the line? North Carolina draws the line at 16. Regardless of where you draw the line, the juvenile court system is focused, as I said, on rehabilitation. Juvenile individuals adjudicated delinquent are not assigned a probation officer. They are assigned a court counselor. listen to the language. Listen, the language tells you what the intent is. When juvenile court, when juveniles are adjudicated, they are not placed on probation. They are placed on diversion. They're placed on diversion. Juveniles in North Carolina don't go to prison. When I talk juvenile, I'm talking somebody under the age of 16. Juveniles don't go to prison. Juveniles go to training school. Think about that for a second. They go to training school. In California, for example, the juvenile justice system is not called juvenile prison. It's called the youth authority. They have they have treatment centers. They have juvenile detention centers. They don't go to jail. They don't go to prison. They go to detention centers. They go to treatment centers. They go to training school. Okay, the focus is on education. The focus is on rehabilitation. The focus is on restoration in the juvenile justice system. Very, very important concepts here. And so juveniles are held to a different standard than are adults in terms of their criminal activity and the consequences of that criminal activity. Juvenile, somebody incarcerated in the juvenile justice system cannot be incarcerated for life. They can be incarcerated only up to the age of 21 years. At 21 years of age, they are let go. Regardless of what they have done, they are off the hook at the age of 21. Done, finished, on with their lives. So life in prison is not possible in the juvenile justice system. Now you may say, well, gee, Dr. Capoletti, why is it that I've heard of a 15-year-old who got life in prison? We're going to talk about that here in a minute. We're going to talk about that with Ethan Couch here in just a second. So, but anyways, now why 21 years of age and not 18 years of age? It goes back to the rule of sevens in Old English law that we have kind of gotten away from. 21 used to be the age of majority, not 18. Back in the 50s and 60s, you were not an adult until you were 21. You could not vote until you were 21. You could not have a full license until you were 21. You could not own property until you were 21. You could not, men could not get married until they were 21. Women could get married at 16 or 17, but that's a whole different issue. Women have always been treated as the property of men in our society in according to English law. It's why women take on their husband's last name when they get married, is they take on their husband's last name because they become a part of the husband's family, and they become part of the husband's property along with his children. And we can get into this if you want to in a little bit later, but statutory rape laws were originally property crimes. They were not intended to protect the child. Statutory rape laws were intended to protect the father's property. And we can get into the logic of that here in a bit, which is why under statutory rape laws, the parents need to press charges in order for statutory rape prosecution to commence, is because the laws were written to protect the property of the father who owned his wife and children. I mean, it goes back a long time. We human beings, we have a long history of owning one another. It's rather disgusting if you ask me, but it's part of our history. So anyways, so it goes back, 21 goes back to the rule of sevens. That is, you were at 7 was when infancy ended. 7 or 14, 7 years later was when childhood ended, and 21 was when adolescence or apprenticeship ended. And so it was the rule of sevens. It goes back to biblical times. It goes back to the Jewish Bible, 7, 14, 21. There are 7 days in the week. You were no longer an infant at 7 years. You became apprenticed at 14 years. You became a member of the church at 13, 14 years. 21 was when you became a full member of the tribe or a full member of the clan. So that's part of the reason for the 21 years in terms of remaining in the juvenile justice system. Okay.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely, Courtney, please. I love questions.
Okay. So with the age of 21 now, does that like fall back on your brain getting more developed the older you get? Because
Well,
isn't it?
Well, it does and it doesn't. I mean, when we start keep in mind that these laws were developed in the early 1900s prior to anybody understanding a darn thing about the brain development.
Right.
Okay. Now we continue to keep it at 21 here, and one of the arguments is to actually raise this to 25, because what is the age at which most males have a fully developed frontal lobe? 25.
Isn't it like 23 to 25?
Absolutely, 23 to 25. And so there is a movement, although not a very strong one right now, to raise the age from 21 to 23 or 25. 25 is the age I'm hearing or I read about most, because that's when 90%, 95% of all males have their frontal lobe fully developed.
Right. Okay. I didn't know if that had any kind of influence on why we still keep it at 21 nowadays, but
It does. It's just part of the reason why we keep it at 21. And then, as I said, there is a movement to raise it to 25.
Right.
That you can be kept in the juvenile justice system until you're 25 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, part of it goes back. Why hasn't that happened? It goes back to money. Nobody wants to pay for it. And if we were to increase the age to 25, we'd have to find a way to pay for it, and nobody can figure out how to pay for it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah. In North Carolina, as I say, if you are prosecuted at 15, you are in the juvenile system. And if you are prosecuted at 15 and sentenced in the juvenile system, you stay in the juvenile system until you are 21. Now, if you commit a new crime after the age of 16, then you automatically get bumped to the adult system because now you're an adult. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you now.
Okay, but if you're 15, commit a crime, sentenced for the crime, you can then be on probation or incarcerated until you're 21. So for 6 years, if you're 15 when you commit a crime, the maximum sentence you can get is 6 years.
Okay, all right.
But if you're 16 when you commit a crime, the maximum sentence you can get is whatever it is for that crime for an adult in North Carolina. As I said, in California and most other states, it is 18 is where they draw the line between juvenile and adult systems.
So they start getting charged as an adult at 16 here.
In North Carolina, yes.
Okay.
When my son turned 16, I had my wife and I had a very serious talk with him, and we said, Mason, if you get in trouble now, you go to big person jail.
Yeah.
Not that he's going to get in trouble. He's a good kid, and he really does well in most things. But we had that talk with him that in North Carolina, at 16, you get in trouble, you go to big person jail. Although this is another interesting issue in North Carolina. Between the age of 16 and 21, they have a special jail for those individuals. So you are not put in the general prison population. Individuals 16 to 21 years of age are segregated from the general prison population. In fact, in Morganton, there is a prison called the High Rise. It's just outside Morganton. The High Rise is where they incarcerate individuals 16 to 21 years of age. Once you turn 21, then you go to regular prison. The reason they do this is because part of it is federal law that says you cannot house minors and adults in the same prison. So part of it is a federal law, federal statute to that. The other part is the idea that individuals who are 16 to 21 years of age would become prey for the older criminals, the 25, 26, 28-year-old criminals in a regular prison. And so we want to, even though they've done bad things, we want to punish them. We want retribution. We also don't want 16-year-olds being gang raped in prison. And but nobody wants that. Nobody. That is not anybody's idea of true justice. Well, maybe it's some people's idea of true justice. I don't know. It's not my idea of true justice. If that makes sense, it's kind of interesting. But so we've talked about the juvenile justice system. The focus of the juvenile justice system is on treatment, is on rehabilitation, is on restoration, is on getting the individual to stop doing the crimes and treating them differently. However, an individual who is between 13 and 16 years of age, up to 16. So maybe I should say 13, 14, and 15-year-olds in North Carolina. So 13, 14, and 15-year-olds in North Carolina. In other states, 13 to 17-year-olds. While they are automatically in the juvenile justice system, they can be moved to the adult system depending on the severity of the crime and the intent. Here's where we get into, again, mens rea. If a 13, 14, 15-year-old has committed a super serious crime, and it can be shown that they have the maturity and understanding of an adult, then they can be tried in the adult system and receive adult penalties. They move from a system that is focused on rehabilitation to a system that is focused on retribution. And I'm going to say that again. They move from the juvenile justice system to the adult justice system. They no longer have the protections of a juvenile because not only juveniles are tried in juvenile court, which is a much less formal, much more informal setting. In the juvenile court, you do not have the same high standard of proof as in adult criminal court. It's much more of an informal, what can we do to save this young man or young woman type atmosphere, as opposed to the adult court, which is very much prosecutorial, adversarial. It is not very formal. It is, I mean, it's not informal. It is a very formal system. So this is the issue with Ethan Couch. This is exactly the issue with Ethan Couch that you have to take into account in this coming case study. Is you need to look at the severity of the offense. In your opinion, can you justify, in your opinion, keeping him in the juvenile justice system or putting him into the adult system? Does the severity of the offense, justify moving him into the adult system? Now, that alone is not enough. There are lots of juveniles who have committed murder who stay within the juvenile justice system. And I could have had other case studies besides Ethan Couch, which would be a whole lot more clear that yes, this 14-year-old committed murder, but no, this 14-year-old should be in the juvenile system, not in the adult system. The second issue then is the mens rea issue, or what we might want to talk about in terms of the level of maturity issue. To what extent is the individual culpable? Again, I'm badly spelling that word because I'm trying to write it with my finger and my finger isn't writing well. To what extent is the individual culpable? To what extent do they fully understand and can appreciate the consequences of their action? Now, your book goes into it in a bit different words, in a bit different language, but that is the whole issue, is what is Ethan Couch, the severity, and I think most people would say the severity does justify it, but I'm going to leave that up to our panelists. If somebody can reasonably argue that, no, this wasn't severe enough to be bumped to adult court, then that would be okay. I will accept that. But if they can't argue that, then the question becomes maturity, culpability, the extent to which he is responsible for his own behavior. And this is the core issue in the Ethan Couch case. Now, the psychologist that was hired in the Ethan Couch case to testify on his behalf talked about something called affluenza. Those of you doing the case study next week, I really suggest you look up the whole issue of affluenza. This psychologist invented this term. Now that's okay. We psychologists, we invent all kinds of terms. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an invented diagnosis. The diagnosis was invented after the Vietnam War as a way of describing what was happening to a number of the troops returning from Vietnam. Okay, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Alexithymia is a term that I use often when I'm describing emotional numbness, and that is an invented term. So inventing a term does not make the term a bogus term, does not make the term a term that has no value. So affluenza is a term that was invented by this psychologist to describe teenagers who grow up in an affluent environment. And as a result of that affluence, they don't learn consequences for their behavior and therefore do not understand how their behavior affects others, and therefore do not understand responsibility, do not accept responsibility, and are not responsible for their actions. Here's another concept in the juvenile justice system, looking at my notes here. Another concept in the juvenile justice system is that the parents are responsible. So parents' responsibility. The child is still under the control of their parents. The child is still under the influence of their parents. The parents are the ones who are responsible for the child's behavior, not the child. Now, nobody argued that Ethan Couch's parents should have gone to jail or gotten the death penalty for what he did. But the issue is that because he was a juvenile and because of this state of affluenza, where basically his parents were so incredibly wealthy that he never had to suffer the consequences for any of his behavior, that it was really the parents' fault that he had committed this crime and he himself was not responsible. That was the argument. Now, I know a number of you are probably hearing that and saying, Jesus Christ, Dr. Cappelletti, you actually mean that a judge bought this? Yes, a judge bought this and Ethan Couch got off on it question I'm asking you to look at is, do you agree or disagree with the judge's ruling? Do you think that Ethan Couch was responsible to the degree that he should have suffered the penalties in the adult system? Okay. There's lots and lots of information on Ethan Couch out there. Trust me. Unlike the Wesley Allen Dodd case, unlike David Berkowitz, some of the other ones or the Spilotro case, where there's very little on Anthony Spilotro. And by the way, that's true of most mafiosi. Most mafioso do not have Facebook pages, for example. Why? They don't want you to know nothing about them. They don't want you to know their background. They don't want you to know. Why don't they want you to know? Because the more you know about them, the less they can get away with. Okay, think about that for a minute. The less people know about you, the less you can get away with. Busted my son and daughter, for example, based on their Snapchat stuff. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Post stuff on Snapchat thinking that mom and dad are too stupid to find it. Ah, okay. Also, be very, very careful what you post on Snapchat, Instagram, or Facebook, because future employers will look at your Facebook, your Snapchat, and your Instagram. I used to do it when I was a director. Reason I have a Facebook account to begin with, chase a little squirrel here. Yeah, I'll bark at the squirrel and then we'll get back here. Reason I got a Facebook account to begin with is my board and county personnel insisted that I have a Facebook account so I could check on the Facebook pages of the people who were applying for jobs in my clinic. And so before I could hire them, I'd have to check their Facebook out and see what they were doing. A lot of people lost their job or lost the job offer because they didn't pass the Facebook test. Keep that in mind. Okay, keep that in mind. Don't think that and just deleting it from Facebook doesn't necessarily delete it. Yes, be careful. Be very, very careful. Be careful of what selfies you post. Anyways, getting back to juvenile justice, and as I said, you can find a lot about Ethan Couch. You can find a lot on his Facebook. You can find a lot on his other stuff about him and affluenza. So the question for going from juvenile to adult, if a child or an adolescent goes from the juvenile to the adult system, all of the protections of the juvenile system are gone. The 21-year age limit, gone. The death penalty prohibition, gone. You cannot sentence someone in the juvenile justice system to death. Cannot. And there is no state where you can. If you move them to the adult justice system, there is some controversy. Some states are trying to do it, some states are not. But there have been 16-year-olds who have been sentenced to death. Matter of fact, I think the youngest person in the United States to be executed was 13, I believe, or maybe he was 11. I'll need to look on that to be absolutely sure, but quite young. Why? Because they got moved from the juvenile justice system to the adult system, in which all the protections of the juvenile justice system were taken away. So that's the question, is for you to answer with Ethan Couch. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time. This lecture has gone on for about 40 minutes already, and your book, as I said, your book goes into some really good detail on juvenile justice. This kind of sets up the scenario for the case study for this next week. But Courtney, do you have any questions, any further questions you want to ask before I sign off?
So going back to the affluenza stuff, like,
Yeah.
how would you describe an environment like that?
Oh, what do you mean? How would I describe an environment? An environment that creates affluenza in adolescents?
Yeah, like, could you give me like another example?
Yes. I can't think of another case example like Ethan Couch right offhand, but the example of affluenza, at least according to this psychologist who invented the term, is it's the result of very wealthy upper middle class or wealthy families whose children do not have to accept responsibility. That their parents buy their grades in school. Their parents have enough money that they can intimidate the teachers to make sure their children get straight A's. The parents have enough money that if the child gets in trouble, they can pay a good attorney, they can pay the fines. The child never has to suffer the consequences for their behavior. The child basically gets everything they want, doesn't have to work for anything. Everything is given to them. That is the idea of affluenza. As a result, the child grows up believing that nothing they do
It has
is wrong,
consequences.
has consequences. Nothing
Okay.
they do is wrong.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now.
And so that was basically this psychologist's argument for Ethan Couch was that his parents had bought everything for him. They bought his grades, they bought his awards, they bought him a place on the football team. I guess he was on the football team. In other words, he sucked as a football player, but because the parents bought uniforms for the football team, guess what?
He was on the team.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so as a result, he never learned that his behavior had consequences and that he would ever get in trouble for anything he did.
Okay, I got you now. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, if there are no good questions, Courtney, very good
Thank you.
question.
Thank you.
Anything else, any last minute comments or questions before I sign off here?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. The juvenile justice, I got my start in forensic psychology in the juvenile justice system in Fresno, California. I started working with the delinquent teens long before I started working with the criminal adults. I liked working with hormonal, attitudinal, rotten little teenager. They were good to work with, and I really enjoyed working with them. But yeah, I used to go to juvenile hall all the time. I used to go to the was called the Ashjan treatment. Ashjan was a person's name. Ashjan Treatment Center. He was Armenian, and so it was his last name. But it was a treatment center. Basically, it was a 180-day lockup for kids. In California, they could be sentenced to 180 days in the treatment center, which provided them with counseling, provided them with school, it was a structured environment, provided them with rehabilitation resources. They had, they learned skills, job skills, they learned money management skills. So it was a treatment center, really very, very focused on treatment. So I worked with that for a while before working for the California Department of Corrections. I worked for the California Youth Authority for a bit, which again is another step up. And then I worked for the California Department of Corrections for a while. But going back to what I was saying, I got my start in forensic psychology with juvenile justice in California and found it very interesting, fascinating, and really liked working with the kids.
Yeah, that's something that I've kind of thought about like doing with my life. I've been really wanting to focus on juveniles.
Yeah, it was very good. If you want to talk more about it, Courtney, I'd be more than happy to share my experiences as well as give you some advice on how to get into the juvenile justice system. If you want to get in on the treatment side of it, you want to get in on the court counselor side of it. There's a number of different places where you can get in. And I'd be more than happy to talk with you about how you can do that after you get out of Lenore-Ryan. By the way, Courtney, what level are you at? Are you a senior, junior?
I'm a senior, and I was a double major in criminal justice and psych,
Uh-huh.
but I'm gonna be one class short of getting both of my degrees on time.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, I'm just gonna graduate with the CJ degree, but I've got a minor in psychology and sociology.
Okay, well, that would be very helpful to you. I mean, a major in crim, minor in psych and soc would be very helpful if you want to get into the treatment aspect at the bachelor's level, getting into the treatment aspects. You can, training school up in Swannanoa hires people quite frequently. We have some detention centers. You can also work in group homes. We have a number of level 3 and level 4 group homes that you can work in if you want to work in the residential area of it. There's all kinds of you can do MST with a bachelor's degree in criminology, minor in psych. You can do what's called MST, multisystemic therapy. All you need is a bachelor's degree in a relevant field, crim, psych, and you can do MST working with juveniles involved in the juvenile justice system. There's a lot of opportunity. So if you're interested, come see me sometime, and I'll be more than happy to give you some ideas on how to get into that.
That would definitely be helpful, because I've been pretty bummed out about like me being one class short, because I was working really hard toward it, and then when COVID hit really hard,
Uh-huh.
my psychological statistics class shifted online, and I just couldn't do it anymore.
Okay.
And it was hard. It was very, very, very hard.
I don't know how anybody can learn statistics online, to be honest with you. I taught statistics for 13 years, and I would never, ever, ever try to teach statistics online. I just don't think it's just too tough. It's just too hard for students to learn it that way.
Yeah, it was last semester when COVID hit really hard, and
Mhm.
the rest of the content through the class was through like SPSS and like, like actually like the programs online. So it was just really hard to